What's unique about the Jewish body? Maybe the combo of fear and humor.
Yes. Is there a clumsiness?
Oh yeah, an awkwardness.
Wonder. Yeah, there is a kind of course, like there's all types of bodies and kinds of personalities, but there is a quality, yeah, of like not owning it, perhaps.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting. Like, tell me about a moment in your process of making Holocaust brunch that felt really enjoyable and like it was a discovery.
Oh yeah, okay. So there's a part of a strand in the show that is sort of a game that's not a game, that's about anti-Semitism. So it's like the top 10 things non-Jews say to me about the Holocaust, asterisk who believe that it happened. And that character is the most difficult for me, the most uncomfortable, I guess, of everything in the show. But one of the people I worked with, as an outside eye, like they had me do an exercise where I just sort of walked around the space as the character saying nonsense, like gobbledygook, like just like like just like being that person without real words. And that was really fun. I think I discovered a lot of physicality and vocal things and stuff around pace, and like I feel like it's coming back to life now as I describe it. Like I can remember it really vividly. Yeah, it's interesting thinking about that in the context of archive and like, is that, for example, is that an example of, you know, finding the archive in the body or something? Or like, yeah, like retrieving something, the archive from within, or like adding, is it adding to it? Yeah. What about for you?
I think many different ones, but like if I think about, I made this piece called Displace with a performer from Colombia, and we both interviewed lots of international theater makers, or not just theater makers, but performance artists, like people who work in the performance arts, who lived in the UK, and about their experience of being immigrants and moving here. And then we created this game where people had to choose between the 10 of them, which one gets to stay in the country. And we got to, yeah, I found that process of interviewing and kind of cutting. I found the cutting, it's hard to choose, but it was so rich in terms of like so many different experiences and the amount of, yeah, I think in terms of archives, it's just like, people's lives are so rich and kind of like bringing these stories that we don't know much about, like we don't see much on stage, or you know, like we live in this country and we rarely get told those narratives, and and then embodying them, like because the game would be that Alejandro and I would be the compares, the game masters, and then people would meet first the characters through like a list of questions and answers, and then through boxes with their objects in the second round, and then the third round you get to meet the two finalists, which we would play. And it was quite interesting, like embodying them, but like that also keeping part of myself. It wasn't about playing those characters, but it was finding the in-between between. And that, yeah, I think I enjoyed that process, like of bringing other people into my body and kind of, and those to the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do we want to like explore any shapes from our archive, like our physical archives?
Yes.
Like just quick fire, like what you were saying earlier, but maybe with shapes or gestures.
Yes. Like with displays, it's funny because like I usually work with my body and I don't, in my performance work, I don't try to interpret or to become something else. Of course, there was like, you know, each character, we had Minseo who like, she was a dancer, so there was more of a like a kind of stability in the body and that, but still very minimal and kind of, yeah, Mulonga, which would be something more like this, and then João was more like a head, kind of like a brainy guy, and like, so that would lead a bit more, yeah, little things. I'm trying to think. With Where to Belong is more like me with you on stage, like present and kind of relaxed and go through a journey, but mostly like there's this kind of conversation going on. And with Unfamiliar, it's more of there's more of a stillness and more of a kind of clean, controlled environment kind of thing where the words take more space. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I could think about Holocaust Brunch, and two of the characters who were in the show, apart from me, are my friend's grandparents, Bluma and Isaac, her late grandparents. And I did a bit of work with a couple of people from the company Figs and Wigs, who I just love. I love their use of dance, and I love their physicality and their humor. And we had such a fun day. And actually, this is quite fun. So two of the games that they play as a company, as part of their process, one is thinking about like a scene or like a character and like their favorite meal, and then embodying their favorite meal. So for this like game host in Holocaust Brunch, it was jambalaya, which I realize is, yeah, it's like sort of Creole, Caribbean. It's not like from white culture. So I'm just gonna acknowledge that. But there's something, I have eaten it before, and or a version of it. And there's something very like, it was very like that. It was like really fun. And you put music on and you just, and there's also a game where you can guess what dish someone's embodying. And actually, like, it's not that hard. So like someone was like potatoes gratin, and or you know, like creme brulee or something. Like, it was really fun. So we did that together, and then for the Bluma and Isaac characters, you know, one of the things I thought about was like which part of their body like leads, sort of, you know, and or like where's the center, kind of. So with Isaac, it was quite grounded. It was like a bit more low and kind of open and just like that. And with Bluma, it was a bit more, and this was sort of class related as well, because he was raised poor and she was more middle class. So, and thinking about gender as well, and also just their personalities. And so she was quite proper and composed and, you know, very more like this, you know, and he was like that. Yeah. Yeah, and then I think maybe similar to what you were saying, like the character who was me was just, I think, like a lot more neutral and just kind of, here I am.
And how do you work with objects?
Good question.
Archival objects.
Yeah.
And do you usually use like real ones, or do you remake them, or?
Yeah, a mix. I'm thinking about the new show I'm making, which is called Old Friends, and it's about friendships, past and present, and it's about Simon and Garfunkel. And so I'm still very much thinking about which objects to use and how, and I don't know yet, but there are real objects that I'm working with, like photographs and a photo album, a real record of theirs that I have. But then, yeah, there's also more, I guess, objects that there's like a candle that I've used so far that I already had, but what would we call that? You know, that doesn't feel like archive in the same way. Maybe more like something that I'm using strictly for the purposes of the show or something. But I like using both. I like having a mix. I'm thinking about your work and the suitcase in Where to Belong and the radio, but then you've also used recordings, and that feels like that's obviously archive as well. Yeah, or Unfamiliar that felt like domestic objects. But yeah, what about you? Yeah.
So I rarely think of like, let me buy this because I need this for the show. It's more like what's around, what's in my life, and what can I use that might serve this story or this experience. And because actually it also comes a lot from what's around me. Like I'll be in the studio or I'll be in my living room, like the last, the new show I was making during lockdown, you're at home. So there were lots of clothes hanging around. And then I was like, oh, maybe that can be like, because it's about what does it mean to be enough, and about the different characters we play in our lives through clothes as well. So suddenly that becomes important. And of course, then I might adapt, like, in Where to Belong, for example, like the boxes. Of course, we need to buy new boxes. We need to rethink how they work. But usually whatever is there was there in the studio with me in the first place, or I brought it from home because I thought it would work and stuff like that. I might buy something, but it's rare. The chair in Where to Belong that becomes the suitcase, it was given to me by a friend who was moving countries and he wanted to get rid of it. So that became part of my studio, and that also became significant, he then departed completely from the world, to be honest, which was a huge thing. But the recordings are definitely archives. I create archives through lots of recordings, writings. I create with objects that I'll bring to the studio, lots of different objects that I'll leave in a corner. Like with Where to Belong, with the Unfamiliar, it was our domestic objects, and it was especially then because it was about us being a family and our space together, and it was like, what can we use from our space that represents that, and these were the things we used. And back to with Displace, it was harder because it's like, I think my question with this stuff is that firstly, it's very hard to ask someone else for their stuff because we used objects to represent each character, but from what they told us, because you then ask an interviewee, like, can you give me objects to use? And then it's also like, once they become part of a show or performance, they'll also have a wear and tear. Like, so there's a certain care you need to have, or you do need to substitute them for something else. And it's how do we negotiate that, right? And
yeah.
I think, because it's special. There's a real thing on stage and everyone's curious because it's a real thing. But sometimes you do need to fake it. And where is the line, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about how, so I have Canadian and Polish citizenship, and I only got Polish citizenship a few years ago. I wasn't sort of born with it. And it's through my dad's parents, really through my Zeta, my dad's dad. And the process of getting citizenship involved basically collecting as much documentation as possible to do with his journey. So it means that I now have his birth certificate, and well, it's just telling to look at where there's documentation and where there isn't. So there's no documentation for the Second World War years. Like, we know his story, we know where he was, but there isn't that proof or, you know, that sort of record. And then the next piece of documentation is from the German Red Cross when he was in a refugee camp in Germany. And then we have his landing card in Canada, and then there's various pieces of documentation in Canada, like when he got married, when he became a citizen, and so on. And I would love to do something with that body of objects and records one day. But yeah, there's an added dimension to that. Like, it's one, you know, compared to just like knowing that story, but then having all these like images from it, and just, you know, the handwriting of all the different like government officials who handled it or like helped create it or whatever, and the different languages. Like, it's just a whole other experience.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. To me, it's so interesting. Also, the absence of archive, how much of an archive itself it is, isn't it? Like,
Right. Yeah. And then also, where does storytelling or like oral history or family oral history like fill in those gaps almost, you know? Yeah. Because I think there's also different, like, just thinking about what I know of in like indigenous traditions in the Americas that is more centered around oral history and passing down of knowledge and history that way, as opposed to through the written word, you know? So it's like there's cultural differences as well.